Hey y'all, I'm Sarah Wall in the Fox 10 newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us today as we go in depth. Today we're talking about a new law that's set to go effect in October of this year that's going to stiffen penalties in cases that are deadly DUIs and hit and run accidents. We're going to talk a little bit about what this new law is, the inspiration behind the changes. There are two local teenagers and their families who really made the big push to make this happen, to change this law. We're also talking to local officials about why this is important and what you need to know, the ins and outs of the new law that Alabama Governor Kay Ivey just signed into law. So let's go ahead and get started here talking a little bit about the Safe Streets Law, the Safe Streets Act that we are just had signed into law by the governor. Alabama will soon have tougher penalties for deadly DUI and hit and run crashes. Governor Kay Ivey, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, has signed the Devaney Rooney and John Wesley Holt Safe Streets Act into law after it passed unanimously in the legislature. So this law, as mentioned, is named for two young people killed on Alabama roads, 19-year-old University of South Alabama student John Wesley Holt and 18-year-old Theodore High School senior Devaney Rooney. Their families say short jail sentences for the drivers in these cases pushed them to fight for change. And here's what John Wesley's mom was talking to us about.
When I was in the courtroom and we heard a 1-year sentence, I could hear John Wesley's voice in my ear going, "Mom, really? My life is only worth a year?" So at that point, I made it my mission to change the law.
And the Safe Streets Act actually raises leaving the scene of a deadly crash from a Class C felony to a Class B felony. It also lets judges order restitution to victims' families. Supporters, including Mobile County District Attorney Keith Blackwood, say it will ensure true consequences for dangerous drivers. And again, the law takes effect in October, on October 1st of next year. So we're going to kind of break this down a little bit for you and give you the ins and outs and what you need to know about this. First thing is, this is the law verbatim. It was a HB 243 that was introduced. The bill's sponsor, Representative Margie Wilcox, you can see her name on there. She says that her legislation's not going to reverse the damage done by people who drove under the influence, but she says it will hold them accountable. So when I kind of give you a look at this, we scroll down, and this is the verbatim of the bill, the synopsis, talking about what the existing law has in it, and then going on to how things are going to be changed that once this law becomes, was signed into law by the governor. So it goes through here and kind of gives you the verbatim of what it was. But it's interesting to point out that under the existing law, before we had the Safe Streets Act, the Devaney Rooney and John Wesley Holt Safe Streets Act, under the existing law, a person commits the crime of criminally negligent homicide if he or she causes the death of another individual by criminal negligence. This is all like, legalese, law words here. Criminally negligent homicide is a Class A misdemeanor, but in cases where the criminally negligent homicide is caused by the driver or operator of a vehicle or vessel who's under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance, it becomes criminally negligent homicide, or that it is a Class C felony. So what we've changed here is, instead of being a Class C felony, this actually becomes a Class B felony. So just the differentiation in the two. A Class C felony has to do with less severe felonies like third-degree robbery, certain theft offenses, first-degree stalking, and possession of controlled substances. It has a sentencing of 1 year and 1 day up to 10 years in prison with fines up to $15,000. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but these are just kind of some of the basics for a Class C felony. So what we are going to see change here is now this will be a Class B felony, which has to do with more serious crimes, which are often violent or high value, but they're not capital offenses. So examples of that would be first-degree manslaughter, second-degree kidnapping, first-degree assault, robbery, high-value theft. Those are examples of what are Class B felonies. The sentencing for this has to be between 2 and 20 years, so a big change from 1 to 10. Now we're 2 to 20, and the fines could be up to $30,000. Before the bill, was signed in before this new law, a crash that caused serious injuries punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Okay, that's serious injuries. Notice the differentiation here. Serious injuries was punishable by up to 20 years in prison, but a crash that caused the death of another person while driving under the influence, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. So that's the distinction, and that's the issue that a lot of people had with how this was set up, and that does include Mobile County District Attorney Keith Blackwood. In fact, he talks about the fact that there were some big things that were fixed by this law. So that's one of the big things that's going on there as well. And I'm going to take a look at what the district attorney said here too as well. But also letting you know that, Representative Wilcox says that that's what really needed to change. The fact that you get a higher punishment for serious injuries than people would for death if they're convicted. So the bill also called the Devaney Rooney and John Wesley Holt Safe Streets Act because Rooney was killed in a wreck that was caused by a drug-impaired driver, and Holt was killed in a hit and run. The person who hit Rooney went to county jail for 6 months. The person who hit Holt served 1 year behind bars and 4 on probation. Okay, so let's take a look at what the district attorney is talking about here, because he does focus in also on how these things were looking under the law, right? He said that these were some things that really needed to be fixed. So he talks about it fixes dangerous gaps in Alabama DUI and hit and run laws. So this is specifically talking about changing things to make the punishment stiffer and more severe when someone is killed in a DUI, driving under the influence, or a hit and run. And again, it takes effect on October 1st. And he says, the district attorney says it corrects major inconsistencies in Alabama law related to driving under the influence and leaving the scene of serious crashes. So the district attorney said he worked with Senator David Sessions and Representative Margie Wilcox on this legislation to help kind of refine it. He did a lot of testifying, he says, and talked about how there was a gap that needed to be fixed. And he says that the previous law, again, if you caused the death of another person while driving under the influence, you could potentially face a lesser punishment than someone who caused serious injury. So it didn't make sense, according to the district attorney, the legislators, and the government, so they said they are working to correct it. And again, we kind of broke down just a second ago that Class C felony, which was what these were classified as, 10 years in prison. Now they're classified as Class B felony, which could go up to 20 years in prison. So, this way, they increase the penalty and the fines when someone is killed in one of these situations. And they also said that, it corrects the inconsistency by ensuring that causing the death of another person while driving under the influence is punished at least as severely as causing physical injury. And it also, so it talks about 2 specific things: driving under the influence and also hit and run crashes, because previously defendants convicted of leaving the scene of a crash could not be ordered to pay restitution to victims for medical bills or property damage. But now this law changes that and allows the courts to order restitution for victims who suffer harm when a driver illegally leaves the scene of a crash. It also strengthens the penalties for drivers who flee crashes involving serious physical injury or death, and making sure that the punishment, according to the district attorney, really does go along with what has happened in the case, in the different situations and in the different cases. So, we talked with Margie Wilcox. We've actually been talking with her quite a bit throughout this, and we did discover that, she talked about the fact that restitution was one of the big things that she also wanted to work on with this, because she said there was no avenue for people to get help a lot of times when they had to bury their children. We talked with Democratic Representative Napoleon Bracey. He wanted to talk about why some convicted of these crimes appear to get a lighter sentence in these situations as well. Now, so we just mentioned that District Attorney Blackwood worked with Representative Wilcox, and he also worked with Senator David Sessions, because there were 2 versions of this bill, both a House and a Senate version. Since they were identical, the Senate version had already passed in that chamber. Representative Wilcox asked for the Senate version to be the one the House considered in order to fast track it to the governor's desk. And the bill, it's Senate Bill 169. It has been signed, and it's waiting. It has been signed. and that is officially changing the law. Okay, so we mentioned that there were two teenagers that they really were the inspirations, and you're seeing their pictures there on your screen. We have John Wesley Holt and we have Devaney Rooney. And I want to talk a little bit about their cases as well. So we're going to start with Devaney Rooney. The Mobile man convicted of causing a fatal crash while high on drugs learned his fate. That's what you just saw right there, was him in court. So a judge sentenced Yaderick Madera Morales to the maximum 10-year sentence. But, and this has to do with the death of Devaney Rooney, but under state law, 2 years is the most time he can spend in prison, with the rest of that sentence suspended. And since the defendant also got credit for time served that he was in jail, he was actually released after spending only 6 months in prison. Devaney Rooney was killed in 2020 by a driver under the influence of drugs, according to officials. She was just days away from graduating from Theodore High School. And again, the driver that was convicted, you see him on your screen there, his name is Yaderick Madera Morales. He was only sentenced, or rather, he only served 6 months in jail. Devaney's mom, Terry Rooney, told us that this new law would have made a difference in her daughter's case. She says, if this bill would have been in effect when my daughter was killed, we would have seen a lot more justice. And there you can see Devaney Rooney there during their high school graduation, which is absolutely heartbreaking because she was a senior getting set to graduate when she was killed by officials. He's been convicted, by officials say, of a driver under the influence of drugs. So Devaney Rooney and John Wesley Holt are who this new law is named after, the Devaney Rooney and John Wesley Holt Safe Streets Act. John Wesley Holt is the second one we are talking about here. He went to St. Luke's Episcopal School and he was a soccer player. And this is some video. They did some special things to honor him and remember him through St. Luke's soccer, and that's what we're taking a look at here. But John Wesley Holt was 19 years old and he was a sophomore at the University of South Alabama, majoring in electrical engineering, when he was struck and killed while he was walking on Old Shell Road in 2023. His mom told us he was trying to find a phone charger so that he could call for a ride. The driver in this case, Jasmine Johnson, pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident with injuries, a Class C felony at the time. It is now a Class B felony, according to the new law. So Jasmine Johnson convicted or pleaded guilty to a Class C felony and was sentenced to 5 years, split with 1 year behind bars. So he was released in 6 months. And again, his mom talks about when she was in the courtroom and they heard that 1 year sentence. And actually, I'm going to play that for you again because his mom spoke with us very eloquently. And here's what she had to say.
When I was in the courtroom and we heard a 1 year sentence, I could hear John Wesley's voice in my ear going, "Mom, really? My life is only worth a year?" So at that point, I made it my mission to change the law.
And that she did, right? That she did, along with Devaney Rooney's family, the district attorney. We had several legislators get involved. And again, this did pass unanimously. So the changes to this law under the Safe Streets Act, leaving the scene of an accident causing death, is elevated from a Class C felony to a Class B felony. Under the previous law, killing someone while driving impaired could actually carry a lighter sentence than if the victim had survived. This new law also allows a judge to order the defendant to pay restitution to the victims' families. And we talk about the fact that Mobile County District Attorney Keith Blackwood helped write the bill. State Senator David Sessions and State Representative Margie Cox sponsored it. And I just wanted to give you a look. You know, we just heard from John Wesley's mom, and this is, you know, we're looking at video of them honoring him and remembering him at a St. Luke's soccer game, and they have a number of things that are happening in his honor. And just thought I would kind of focus in on this for a minute as well, speaking about families and how amazing families are. They've created the John Wesley Holt Foundation. They said he's known for showing up and giving his time and heart freely to those around him. His character left a lasting mark on everyone who knew him. So they've created a foundation, and they're working with programs to create a big impact. They have a high school scholarship that's presented to a St. Luke's senior. that most exemplifies John Wesley's character. They're also awarding a scholarship to a sophomore electrical engineering student at the University of South Alabama, and these are the pictures of people who have received that award. And they do a 5K and fun run. That's one of the ways that they raise money. All the proceeds from this support the John Wesley Holt Scholarship Fund, which goes to these two different areas. So it's pretty amazing to see what the family has done after having to go through the tragedy that they went through and coming out in a way that is allowing them to be able to help others in the name of their son. They also are helping others, as is Devaney Rooney's family, as they have been very outspoken in wanting to fix this law, fix the law that has to do with DUI, deadly accidents, and also hit and run situations, hit and run accidents that are deadly. And they have been effective in working with the district attorney and working with state lawmakers to change the law. So this law now goes into effect on October 1st of this year. And so when in the future, after October 1st, for people who are sentenced or convicted under this law or convicted in a DUI or a deadly DUI, driving under the influence, or a deadly hit and run, they will now be on track for these new stiffer penalties and punishments. So that's going to be something that happens on October 1st, letting you know about this new law that is now in effect, and so that you know what our lawmakers are doing and what kind of impact local people, local families have to try to make things better for those that come after them. We'll continue to keep you updated on all the changes and things that are happening in the legislature here on the Gulf Coast. There are a couple of other things that are working their way through. We're keeping an eye on those for you, and we will continue to let you know how they may impact you.